We are back, and we are joined now by Sydney Calkin, Senior Lecturer in the School of Geography at Queen Mary University of London, co-editor of After Repeal, Rethinking Abortion Politics, and author of the book Abortion Pills Go Global, Reproductive Freedom Across Borders. Sydney, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, of course, we're in a post-Dobbs era, and many women, people who can get pregnant, are feeling anxiety about the future of their health care, particularly if they live in red states. And in this country in particular, I think a lot of women are starting to think, like, what if I need to get an abortion? What if I need to get an illegal abortion? And when people hear this, I think they think of the 1950s or the movie Revolutionary Road of coat hanger abortions and bleeding and pushing yourself downstairs. I mean, not to be glib about it, but that is, like, I think the image that gets evoked. But as you write, that does not need to be the case anymore with abortion pill access.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of the research that I did for this book actually took place before the Dobbs decision. And basically the work that I was doing was looking at in a country where, when Roe was in place, abortion was constitutionally protected, and yet it was unavailable in practice for so many people. So self-managed abortion was already a reality in the US before the Dobbs decision. The post-Dobbs bans that we're seeing and the restrictions that will continue to come down are going to make it the go-to method of abortion for many people. But it was already the reality for many, many Americans who were seeking abortions before the Dobbs decision. But as you say, self-managed abortion is not the so-called coat hanger abortion of the past. In fact, it's a very safe and accessible method of abortion that's used across the world. And medication abortion pills were themselves the majority of abortions before the Dobbs decision.
Can you explain the pills themselves, what the medications are, and their safety, and compared to, say, other medications?
Sure. So medication abortion in the US generally takes place with two pills. One is called Mifepristone, the other is Misoprostol. Mifepristone is known as Mifeprex or RU486 in the US. These two medications are usually used in combination. In other countries where Mifepristone isn't available, and perhaps in the future, if Mifepristone is further restricted in the US, people use Misoprostol by itself. But for the most part, in the US, we're talking about Mifepristone plus Misoprostol. These medications are extremely safe. The safety has been what's been at issue in this Supreme Court case. Well, it's been working its way through the courts. It'll be at the Supreme Court soon. But these drugs are as safe as any other medication that the FDA approves. By a lot of measures, they're safer than medications like Viagra, for instance, but of course, they're subject to much, much more regulation. The kind of medications that people use to self-manage abortion when they do it outside of the law are often the same pills that are available in other countries across the world. It's just that people in the US, when they live in restrictive states, they have to get them through other methods that might be online or might be through activist groups.
Yeah, I mean, that Supreme Court case, when you see actually what the text of the claim is against Mifepristone in particular, it's essentially a ton of hypotheticals about what could happen in this scenario and wildly inaccurate claims about the dangers surrounding it, which is not backed up, in my understanding, by any of the data when it comes to these drugs.
No, definitely. I mean, the irony is that the claims about safety in this case, as you say, they're very overblown. The irony is that medication abortion for self-managed abortion has dramatically transformed the safety of illegal abortion around the world. So people who live in countries with restrictive laws can use medication abortion for self-managed abortion, even if they're, not able to go into a hospital or a clinic for that abortion because of their local laws. And the availability of these pills and this method has produced a dramatic fall in injury and death from illegal abortion. So not only is it not the case that the pills are unsafe, but actually they are so much safer than the kind of abortion methods that people were using before. And medication abortion was used in 53% of all abortions in the US in 2020, before the Dobbs decision came down and before these statewide bans started to come through. So it's a highly safe method that was developed decades ago, approved in countries around the world since the late 80s, and approved by the US FDA because of the evidence of its safety.
It's not just the United States that your book focuses on. You focus on other countries that are in a bit of a flux, or in a point of contraction, restriction on abortion as well. Why did you make that choice to? And it's your book is about globalizing the abortion pill. So you, I think, chose to zoom out on purpose. What was behind your decision to do that, and what were some of the other countries that you focused on?
In the book, I look at the US, Ireland, Poland, and Northern Ireland. A lot of the conversation about abortion pills has focused on Latin America, because that's where the kind of clandestine use of misoprostol for abortion originated. But I was interested in how medication abortion was transforming the accessibility of abortion in other countries where the laws are restrictive. The interesting thing is that I started this work back in 2016, when the legal landscape looked so different in many of these countries. When I started this work, Roe versus Wade was still the law of the land in the US. Ireland had a constitutional abortion ban. Northern Ireland had a near total abortion ban. And Poland had restrictions, but fewer than it does now. Fast forward to 2024, and we see, in the US, increasing numbers of state total abortion bans or near total abortion bans. Poland tightened its laws. By contrast, in Ireland, there is a relatively progressive abortion law that allows abortion without regard to reason up to 12 weeks. And in Northern Ireland, it's been decriminalized. So these countries have seen a transformation in the years during which I studied them. And I make the case in the book that medication abortion has been an important driving factor in changing the politics of abortion in those countries where we've seen progressive changes. And in countries where we've seen the rollback of reproductive rights, medication abortion has been a lifeline for people that has allowed them to continue to access abortion, regardless of what their local laws say.
It reminds me a bit of how, AIDS drugs were smuggled into the country in the late 80s and 90s, I believe, in the United States, over the Mexico-US border, because the FDA was, dragging its feet essentially on treating people who were dealing with HIV/AIDS because of homophobia, and then also, administrative issues as well. But these are drugs that can save people's lives and change people's lives, that are subjected to these kinds of moral, religious, fundamentalist, and I say moral in their terms, not in reality, kind of handcuffing that is completely needless, but we're still dealing with these kinds of religious fundamentalist perspectives decades out.
I think it's a fascinating parallel, the one you make with AIDS drugs. And in fact, it's one of the things that sparked my interest in this topic. I was interested in how these medications move. Where do they originate? Who makes them? How do they get from A to B? And the kind of the buyers clubs that you talked about, who we associate with moving those drugs for HIV/AIDS, have a lot in common with the self-managed abortion movement today, in the way that they develop fairly sophisticated systems for identifying where drugs are manufactured, quality, reliable producers of those drugs, routes through which they can be moved, and very sophisticated systems for understanding the different customs and border regimes, and the geography of abortion through which these pills can get to people who need them.
Right. And you highlight a lot of these groups as well, these feminist groups, others, organizations led mainly by women in order to source these medications, procure them, provide them for people in need. What was it like covering some of these groups, and what were some of the people that you interacted with in your journey in writing this book?
Yeah, in the book I talk about a few different feminist activist networks, some of whom will probably be familiar to your viewers because they've been in the news a lot in the US. Like one of them is Aid Access, which is the sort of American-facing branch of the Women on Web, Women on Waves organization. But there's others like Women Help Women, the Abortion Without Borders Coalition, etc. They're fascinating groups of activists, and they are linked up across borders in such interesting ways. A lot of the same faces reoccur in a lot of these different groups because the needs for abortion pills are so similar across borders, and the kind of tactics that people develop in one place to move pills can be useful in other countries when that legal landscape changes. The thing about the self-managed abortion movement that I think is maybe the most kind of revolutionary that I want to share with your viewers is this idea that the self-managed abortion movement is grounded in this sense that access to pills today creates legal change in the future. So these activists are quite skeptical of an approach that prioritizes the courts or legislatures because they think that, well, first of all, they don't think that really any abortion laws are good abortion laws. They think they always end up criminalizing someone. But they also think that creating access to pills on the ground right now will trigger change in public attitudes, change in beliefs about abortion, will trigger realization that abortion is a normal, fact of life. Many people go through it. And that will eventually lead to legal change. So they want to have change now, access now, and produce, better laws and better legal outcomes in the future. But they don't want to wait for that to happen.
Right. And I mean, it's it's not just, I would say, normalizing self-medicated abortion, but for me, I hope this is not like too radical, but it's just normalizing illegal abortion, and normalizing this kind of process where we're later in our program, we'll probably cover some of the claims by Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, about fentanyl smuggling, where that he claims it's coming over the Mexico border, where the overwhelming comes through normal ports of entry in the United States because you can just send stuff through the mail. Obviously, fentanyl is a very dangerous drug that does not have this kind of usage, but you can kind of apply some of those networks to circumventing some of these religious fundamentalist controlling laws in states in the United States.
It's another interesting parallel, and it's also one that I thought through in the research for the book, because I was interested in how do medication abortion pills move through border control points in the US, and how is it the case that these pills pretty reliably get to their destinations in the US. There's simply too much mail to be searched. The medications simply can't be stopped. We hear a lot about this in a kind of narcotics and opioids control situation, but in fact, Americans rely so much on medications that come through the mail. We hear so much about people traveling to Canada or to Mexico to get drugs or medications, or using mail order pharmacies. It's already quite an established, inbuilt part of the way that people manage in the American healthcare system is to look abroad for their medications.
And to your point, I mean, medication abortion as well means that in these states and in other places as well, where there are these restrictions, or if they're in a rural area, people who may not be able to travel, people who may be disabled, or people who do not have the funds and the ability to take off time for work to go to multiple doctor's visits or to go out of state. If you're in a very restrictive state, medication abortion being sent through the mail does solve those problems to a degree.
Yes, and that goes to a point you made earlier I didn't address, which is the self-managed abortion movement. Um, they're also quite critical of medicalization of abortion that imposes a lot of different forms of control by doctors, or puts in new forms of gatekeepers who can decide whether an abortion request is legitimate or whether it's not legitimate. Part of what's revolutionary about self-managed abortion is that it lets people make their own decisions about if they want to have an abortion, how they want it to proceed, where they want it to happen, etc. So I said that this movement is interested in creating access to medications now and then legal change later. But the kind of legal change they're interested in is primarily decriminalization, right? It's not a desire to reimpose like medical or clinical controls on abortion. In fact, a lot of different wings of this movement feel that demedicalizing abortion, destigmatizing it, moving it outside of clinic and hospital spaces gives abortion seekers more control over their bodies and their lives.
Sydney Calkin, the book is called Abortion Pills Go Global, Reproductive Freedom Across Borders. We will put a link to your book in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this, and at majority.fm. Sydney, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.